Hey, and welcome back to Class 9 of vry102. We are at the tail end of finishing out our look dev for our alien, who was designed and modeled by Martin Punchev from cgzen.com. And if you take a look at the scene file included in this week's download, Alien Bust V03, you'll find that I've made a slight adjustment to what we've had previously. This backlight that's up here used to be at 120, and I had it up pretty high because I wanted to get some flesh coming through with that backlight. But I've brought it down to 40 from 120. And what that does is essentially take this to that. So it takes a little bit off the edge there. And when we actually go to the back of this guy, we're going to make a little bit of hair. We're going to add a neat effect to his skin as well. And we'll also be taking a look at V-Ray's lens effects. And we'll be doing a couple of lens effects based on the renders that we get. Now, taking a look at our scene here, we have an extra piece of geometry that I've also added to Alien Bust V03, and that is called Scalp Piece. It's part of the whole group for the bust, but this will be where the hair will grow from. It's just a little bit easier to create that sort of thing based on a piece of scalp that's existing as opposed to trying to map the end hair location. So we'll be using the scalp piece to create our end hair, and we'll be using V-Ray obviously to shade and render that hair. So to begin with, go ahead and select the scalp piece, and we're going to go into End Dynamics under End Hair, and we're going to create some hair with the following options. We'll go 50 and 50 on the UV count. We can adjust this at a later time. And we're going to go very high on our randomization with a value of 2. Hairs per clump we'll leave at 10. And we do want everything else to basically be at these defaults. We're going to be outputting Paint Effects Hair. And here we go. Now, to get our hair to be collidable with our main bust, we're going to select our main bust and turn that into a passive collider under the End Mesh menu. We'll hit Passive Collider. Now, we'll want to expand our frame range so we have time for the sim, but we can see immediately that our hair is going to be colliding with our head. So that's all good. Now we're going to want to fill in some of these gaps with some extra follicles. So we get some hair all the way up front as well. We can do that with the paint hair follicles. So in the options, let's go ahead and set follicle density at 80U and 80V, and we're going to be assigning it to our hair system shape that's already here, and of course we'll be painting directly onto this geometry. This will help fill in some of this fur, some of this hair I should say, this mohawk this guy's going to have. And once you're satisfied with the amount of hair that we've got going on, you can just hit W to get out of that tool and get back to the Move tool. I've rewound all the way to frame 1. We hit play and we've got that hair. Now, that additional hair that we created was actually a little bit shorter, which is great. So if we go back in and take a look, we had a hair length of 2. So all of that extra hair that we added was a little bit shorter, which works out really well because we wanted a little bit shorter up front and getting longer and longer. You can, of course, adjust that as you see fit. Now let's go to frame 1 again. We can see how our clumps are all coming together. So in our outliner, we'll go ahead and go to our hair system. And we'll open up the clump and hair shape. Let's take a quick look at some of these settings as we let our hair settle like that. We'll do a super quick render. With this render, we can see we've got, some hair, obviously, but it's kind of stringy. It's not very cohesive, not very mohawky. Basically, he'll have a hard time finding a date with his hair, kind of like this. So let's go ahead and bookmark our camera so we can come back to it. That'll be camera 4. So we need to thicken up the hair a little bit. And one good thing is the existing shading on the end hair itself is working natively with V-Ray, but we're going to be using V-Ray's own hair shader, which is going to be a bit faster than Maya's current solution. So if we go back to frame 1, in our hair system, let's increase our hairs per clump to 90. So we get a lot more hairs going on overall. We'll turn up our sub-segments to 4. We'll have a little bit of thinning. I know we just added a bunch of hair, but add a little random thinning out of that hair. Keep the bend follow all the way at 1. And our clump width, we're going to increase that. What that does is spreads the hair where it starts from to be a larger area, which pretty much spreads out the hair nicely. If we take a look closer at the render, these are shadow lines from that extra piece of scalp geometry that we have in here. We're going to want to make that hidden, so I'll take the scalp piece, Control H to hide it. There's a very slight difference between where the piece of the scalp is and the actual scalp. That's what's causing that shadowing. Now we have a lot more hair going on, but let's go back to our hair shape, our hair system. And we're going to add a little bit of a curl. If you take a look at the clumps in our hair, if I grab my clump curl and I change it from 0.5, it'll start curling one way or the other. I just want the ends to be curled, so I'll keep the beginning at 0.5 and I'll add another 0.5 node right about there. And then everything after that will start twisting a little bit down. So we've got a little bit of a curl going on to the hair at the ends. Now, we're going to increase our hair thickness a little bit. We'll go to about 0.03 for the hair width. That'll make the actual hairs a little bit thicker. The clump width, we're going to go even higher than this, so we get a broader amount of hair. So we'll go to about 3. If you go too high, you're going to start getting hairs that really start coming off of the geometry. So you want to be careful about this. Maybe a 2, 2.5, give or take. Let's try 2.5 for now. We'll see how this looks. But it does help thicken things out to give him a little bit meaner mohawk. You can, of course, add your own maps to create bald spots. So, for example, if we attach this hair to the whole mesh, you'd be using your baldness map to contain it to just the area that you want the mohawk to be. Now, that should be pretty good. So let's run the hair simulation to allow the hair to basically find its way on his head. And we can set a start location for that, or just work on that frame from now on. No big deal. We can kind of see how the hair is going to go. We'll stop it right about there. And we've got a pretty cool little mane going on now. So if we go back to our camera bookmark, we can compare once we have this in our history. Now notice as well, between the front and the back, how much of a difference there is in the skin lighting. That's because the back is being blasted with a generous amount of light. So this is looking much more fleshy than the front. And if you start blasting the front with that kind of light as well, you're going to start to see some of this flesh tone coming in through the areas that don't have that shell material in the blend. But anyway, that's beside the point. Let's go ahead and render out our new hair. Just isolate it to that area. And so we've got a much thicker mohawk than we did before. However, it is using Maya's shading system currently, and we're going to be swapping that out. Now, for the V-Ray shading of the hair, we're going to be using the Hair Material 3, which is the same material that we used on the V-Ray fur whiskers that were created earlier. However, simply selecting the PFX hair or the hair system or the follicles and assigning it to the material that we've created isn't going to work. What we need to do is add an attribute to the actual hair system. So with the hair system selected, go to the hair system shape node, and in the attributes, you need to add hair shader. And at the very bottom of the attribute editor for the shape node for the hair system, you're going to find a slot for a hair shader. We can simply middle mouse button drag our V-Ray hair material over to our hair shader slot. And now this will be controlling that. So let's just make sure this is in our buffer, and I believe it is. And without really change anything on our hair, let's go ahead and render and see what it looks like. As you can see, as some of these buckets resolve, we're getting a little bit nicer of a subtlety to the hair, a little bit nicer of a specularity, but this is all at its default. So I'm going to cancel the render here, and if we go back and forth between Maya's and V-Ray's solution to the hair shading, there's a little bit more nuance out of this shader. We haven't really done a whole lot to it yet. One of the cool things about the V-Ray hair material is its listing of presets. Now, I'm going to end up doing a bit of a, kind of a Gandalf gray white hair for this guy. You can start with white shiny, but I actually like to start with the black shiny first. That'll give us a nice black hair. Here it is rendered out, and it doesn't look great for this character to be black, but that's alright. That's not my intention. I wanted more of a whiter hair. So on our diffuse color, I'm just going to bring that up to about a mid-tone gray. Perhaps add just a little bit of kind of a hue to it. Slight brown to it. Keep it a little bit dark, a little bit desaturated, but you get the point. We're going to get a bit of a nice, slightly warm gray. And if we test a little bit of it out, we'll get to see that little bit of warm gray come through. One of the ways that we can color this hair a little bit is to set a transmission, go ahead and cancel, is to set a transmission color. Right now it's pretty dark. Let's do something kind of nutty. Let's do a little bit of purple to see how the transmission comes through. Transmission can add a lot of body to your hair, depending on the color scheme that you choose. When you see that purple coming through, you can see a good deal of body and fullness to the coloration of that hair. So we're going to use a little bit of color to get our white hairs to come out a little bit. So we're going to use we'll start with kind of an orange, and then we'll back off on its saturation and reduce its value. The higher the value, the more of that coloration is going to come through. Let's compare a little section to the purple that we're getting before, and this should give us a little bit more hints of that sort of fur color that we've already established. Maybe you want to go a little bit more into the orange and a little bit richer in that color, maybe a little bit more saturated and slightly darker. And we'll start getting more of that fur color that we've established into our hair. Although this guy's kind of a geezer, kind of old, so I'm going to keep his hair a little bit white, give him that sort of distinguished look in his coloration. So pretty happy with that coloring right there, and that was of course achieved by starting with the black shiny preset. We set a tan diffuse color, and we set a transmission as well. Now, one of the things that we're going to do next is add some transparency so that the ends of our hair will act like the ends of the little whiskers that we have, so they come to a sharp point. Now, just like we did with the fur, we need to have a utility node. This time, it'll be the hair sampler, the V-Ray hair sampler right here. We will be piping this into a ramp that we'll be creating, just again, like we did with the fur. For our transparency. So we'll set a ramp like so. Now I like to make the very beginning part of the hair a little bit transparent as well. You may not agree with that, and that's totally cool. So I make dark gray at the base for a little bit of transparency, then it gets opaque, and then it goes transparent at the tip. And if you recall with the fur, we're going to middle mouse button drag the sampler over to the ramp and click on default to open the connection editor. And like the first sampler, we've got distance along strand. We'll grab that and we'll feed it into the V coordinate because this is a V type ramp. go into the V coordinate and create that connection. And this will feed middle mouse button drag over to our transparency. Let's actually make a little bit more transparent along the end there. And we'll create our curve like this, and we'll do a quick render in this and take a look. And here we are. Compared to our render from before, we have a finer hair structure going on here with that ramp. We can do the same with color if we want. Again, just like we did with the fur, if I want to have a little bit of a darker color at the end, I can grab another ramp. I can feed the same hair sampler into our color. So again, distance along the strand, we'll go to the V coordinate of the ramp. And here we'll go, and then our dark point will be kind of a redder version of this, a little bit darker as well. To get a little bit more depth out of it, we can exaggerate as well. Now we just need to put the ramp into our diffuse color and render and take a look. And here we go. With that little bit of color difference, we get quite a little bit of depth coming in from the hair. We can go a little bit darker to accentuate that even further, but also you may want to consider doing something with the transmission as well, where we're going to take yet another ramp. Let's go ahead and just duplicate this one. We'll go duplicate with connections to the network. That keeps our strand distance, and we can adjust this color a little bit to be a bit more colorful, a little bit more saturated, more in the yellows, a little bit more vibrant, and our base will be a little bit more orange. And that will accentuate along the strand as well. So we'll go ahead and middle mouse button drag that to our transmission, and we'll have even more of that color change along the length of each hair. Now, as you can see, we're losing a little bit of our luster that we had before, and I'm going to go ahead and kill the render and show you what I'm talking about. We've lost a little bit of that luster, and that is really because of that ramp on our transmission is just darker than it was before. So we can bring that back in, create a little bit of a root that's dark, but try to keep some of that luster active throughout more of the hair of the strand, but only keep the roots a little bit dark. Make it maybe something like this. Now, one other thing I want to do is introduce a little bit more randomization to the coloring in the hair. It's pretty flat. You know, this should bring back some of that luster that we had before, which will make it look a little bit nicer, but it is still, color-wise, it could use a little bit of variation. And this is something that the hair sampler can help out with. Now, to make a very, very clear example, I'm going to make yet another ramp, except this time I'm going to make just the craziest 3-color ramp with RGB. And I'm going to middle mouse button drag my hair sampler and press default again for the connection editor. And I'm going to select random by strand, and I'm going to basically pipe that into the V coordinate. So randomly by strand, it'll pick a color somewhere off of this ramp. And what that roughly looks like, if we do a quick test render, oops, I actually have to assign it first. We'll go ahead and assign this to the diffuse color. And what this will do is give us a random color per strand, red, green, blue, or any sort of gradation in between those three colors. As you can see, those colors are coming through. We have that new luster on here as well, but you can see each strand has picked up one of the colors off of that ramp. So if this guy wants to be an alien clown monster, then we're going to leave the color as is. However, let's go ahead and do something a little less dramatic in keeping with the coloring that we had before. And we'll go and pick some of our earlier colors. And then just randomly create a few different variations of the values in here to create a little bit of a randomness to what it picks up. It doesn't really matter how the ramp is laid out. It's all pretty random from the coloring that it picks up from here. So we're going to have a fairly good assortment of different colors. Now let's make sure that we are indeed connected to our diffuse color. We are. And we should start seeing some moderate randomization within our hair color. And here you can see we've got a little bit of a difference in some of the hairs. You may want to go a little bit further with the color differential in that ramp. And we can most certainly do that by making colors darker, some colors brighter, even introducing different hues beyond the reach of what we have. But I think just having a few different values that are in the same sort of range will give us a little bit more occasional gray. So and here we go. We've got a fairly randomized sort of hair structure in here from what we had before. We brought some of that luster back in. We had a little bit more interest in the hair going on now. Now, you may be noticing that we've lost the dark to bright coloration for our hair strands. They're all uniform all along the strand, where before we had a nice little grade from a darker brown to a lighter brown. And we've lost that because now we're doing random coloration, which I do prefer. However, I would like the best of both worlds. So what we're going to do is we still have this ramp that was our original diffuse color, which is hooked into the length along the hair strand from the sampler node. I'm going to make this a multiplier of sorts. So I'm going to do a darker gray leading to a full white. And I'm going to allow this to multiply the coloration of my hair along the length of the strand. And the way to do that is in our ramp that we're using for the random color, I'm going to middle mouse button drag this new ramp, or this newly adjusted ramp, and put it on the color gain. And what the color gain is going to do is it'll multiply along the length of the strand, making the base, whatever random color it picks from this ramp, making the base of it this much darker, all the way to the tip, making it the color it's intended to be off of this ramp. And how that looks is pretty cool. And as you can see these buckets clearing, we've introduced a darker root to these hairs, leading to a brighter end to each strand. So now we've got the best of both worlds. We've got some random hair color, and we get to keep the darker roots and the brighter ends. And comparing those two together, this is what we get from that multiplication from that ramp. Gives us quite a bit more body. Now it did darken things down overall a little bit much, so we just bring our white point a little further down so we get to the natural color of each strand a little earlier. And you can always brighten this up a little bit so it's not as dark at the root. And there you have it. Let's do a quick render of the whole mohawk from the back. Now we've got a much more interesting, more natural looking mohawk for our little fellow. And just to tidy things up a little bit, we're going to go in and set our end hair to be our start position. There we go. Now in 3ds Max, instead of using the hair sampler node like we did here, you'll be using the V-Ray hair info text texture, similar to the fur info text texture that we used in last week's class. That will give you access to the random by strand, and it'll give you colors already built into it, the texture, as well as the distance along the strand. And it'll give you the colors as well, so you don't have to create ramp gradient nodes like we have to do here in Maya. So again, in Max you'll be using the V-Ray hair info text texture instead. And here's our shader tree for the hair material and what it looks like. This is all saved in Alien Bust VO4. It takes us to this point where we've got the hair on there and all done up and looking nice. Hey look, there's my tripod. Look at that. And there's my camera. And there's my fat head. Okay, so let's go to our original camera, our render cam. I get a little bit of hair there. What we're going to do next is create kind of a neat skin effect on this guy to accentuate some of the cracks and crevices that he has. So this is our current shader. We'll be creating another material that will be feeding into our existing blend to go on a coat. Now the coats stack on top of each other, and I want to put an intermediate coat between the base and my shell. So what I have to do before I get anywhere is I need to get my shell material onto coat material 1. So here's our shell. We're going to drag that into our coat material. And the same thing with our blend amount. This is our shell amount file, which is this guy right here. So we'll middle mouse button drag this over to the blend amount. So in the blend material, I'm going to disconnect coat material and the blend amount for coat material 0, because I'm going to put something in the middle. Now, earlier we took a look at the V-Ray light material. This is sort of like the surface shade, but it also actually can give off light. Matter of fact, we can turn on direct illumination so that it actually gives off direct illumination as opposed to just GI. Now, what on earth are we going to do with this? Well, one of the maps that I have already in this network is the skin cracks. And the skin cracks looks like this. Really accentuates these skin cracks. And we have it inverted, and we are using it for our butt map. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use it for the color of my light material. So I'm going to middle mouse button drag this over to our color, which is going to give us a pretty neat effect. Matter of fact, just for giggles, I'm going to assign the V-Ray light material directly to our guy and do a super quick render to see what it looks like. What we get is this interesting look. Now, this is a pure black and white. However, we're getting grays here going on, and that's because we're gamma correcting for sRGB, which for this guy, we do want true black and white. Usually don't want to gamma correct black and white, but we're looking at the luminance values and we need this stuff to be pure black. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in that skin crack texture in again, and I'll go ahead and invert it, and I'll put it on the color. But for this one, not for this one, but for this one, I'm going to go ahead and give it our texture input gamma, which again, typically I don't do when I'm using values for grayscale, but this is going to be more color based. So let's make sure that we are assigned, yes, and we'll go ahead and render this out again. Now, going brighter isn't quite what we're looking for. We want to go the other way, and we want a gamma input lower than 1. But you know, I only want some of these white veins showing up, so I'm actually going to use this as a control. So I'm going to go pretty low on my gamma. Actually, I'm going to go very low on my gamma to get a much more severe darkening of everything. So only the brightest veins or cracks in this dude's skin are going to show up, which is what I want for this little special pass that I'm doing, or this little extra bit that I'm adding on. So these will end up actually casting a little bit of light, which is kind of neat. So let's take our node here. We will take our original shell color, or even our original skin color. I'm going to go with the shell color. It's got a little bit of a blue to it. And I'm going to duplicate that with connections to my network. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our black and white skin map that we have here, and I'm going to pump that into my color balance or color gain here. So we have the coloration of our skin being multiplied by our black and white. And this will feed the color of our little light material. We'll be controlling that through the texture input gamma of our multiplier here. So we'll go on our blend material, and we're going to go ahead and put this into our coat material. But we're also going to take our cracks, our original cracks, and we're going to put that into our blend amount to make sure that it's only coming through in those areas. Now I'm using the ungammaed one. Let's see what our guy looks like at this point. We'll go ahead and assign it back to our blend material. Now here's our render, and it doesn't look like it did a whole lot, based off of what we had before. Expecting to see something. Well, keep in mind that we have, a pretty crippling low gamma set on this, and we can inch this up. Let's go all the way to 1. And when we render this, we get a neat little effect where these areas, based on some of these striations, are lighting up even more. And because we've got that skin texture, that skin material is starting to bleed through pretty nicely. And we've laid this under our shell, so our shell material won't be affected. So let's jack this up even more. Let's go to about a 1.5. And because they're actually casting a direct light, they're actually going to help illuminate the dark side of this character, creating kind of a funky look. And here we go. We've got a brighter texture input gamma. And here's what we start to get. Before to now, we're getting extra illumination in these areas. The shells are not being too affected, but you can see a little bit of light coming through the cracks where the shell is broken up, which gives you a kind of a neat little creature feature for this guy. You can paint your map that we use for this effect to maybe create scars or wounds or an internal glow, some sort of internal fire thing going on. But as it is now, it gives our character little something, little je ne sais quoi, a little bit of a self-illumination as well, which is definitely controllable through the brightness of this, which I'm choosing to do through the texture input gamma. I'm going to go back to 1 and keep it there. But you can also gain it, color gain it up and down, because the connection is based on its color and not its alpha, as you can see here. So you won't be alpha gaining it, you will be color gaining it, or gamma gaining it, like I have been. And let's do a full render and take a look. And here's our guy with the added bit of lit up cracks and vein areas. Really comes out very well in some of the darker areas, and especially gives us a little hint of a cool glow under the shell of our guy, because it is actually helping illuminate our scene and gives us kind of a crusty, skin, weird, alien, gonna tear your arms off kind of look. Now, one last thing we're going to take a look at in this week's class is the lens effects settings. I go ahead and open these up. Lens effects have been a part of 3ds Max and V-Ray for a while, and they're kind of newish to V-Ray for Maya. These allow us to do a couple of camera things, bloom and glare, and they're pretty easy. Once you turn on lens effects through this icon here, you can enable bloom, which basically blooms out your image. It's a quick thing that you can do in composite, perhaps with a little bit more control and finesse, but it's also pretty powerful to do here in your VFB as well. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is it's pretty much blooming the entire thing. And you can see that there's a new channel here called the lens effect source. And that is the original image. It takes it, kind of blurs it, and gives you a bloom over the whole thing. But that's not really natural. That doesn't look quite right. We want the bloom to really be happening where it's the brightest. Same thing with the glare. Let's turn the bloom off, turn glare on. That sort of just softened and defocused everything. We want the two of them together. However, we don't want it over the whole image. And this is where our bloom mask and glare mask will come in. What we want to do is we want the intensity of our image to drive where the bloom and our glare go. The intensity setting here has to do with how bright these pixels are going to be. So with these two effects off, I can go ahead and sample, and I'm getting an intensity of about 2.6 for this area. About 2, some areas are about 3, and then we get back into some normal color range. But all around here, I've got anywhere between 1 and 3 coming off of here. So for my bloom mask, I'm going to make this fairly low. So we have a good amount of bloom without getting too much. Same thing with our glare. I'm going to set our glare to about the same, about 1.2, give or take. Now, it says no channel, please re-render. Well, it needs to generate these masks because it doesn't have them. It doesn't know exactly how to create them until you re-render. So, unfortunately, I have to go back and re-render this frame again, which I'll do once I put it into our buffer, just so we have it, and then I'll go ahead and re-render our frame with the bloom and the glare turned on, so they will generate the proper masks. Okay, now that we have the render, we can take a look at what we had before for a quick comparison of the bloom and the glare. It's a subtle thing. It definitely is a subtle thing, but it adds a photographic effect. When I turn bloom off and I turn off glare, it becomes a little flatter. A little bit of glare gives you that sort of lens effect, a little bit of bloom as well. And if you look in your channels, you'll see that you've got a bloom mask and also a glare mask, which are both exactly the same because their intensities are exactly the same as well. So those just picked up the brighter areas of your image and glare them out. This is something you would typically do in comp, but it's nice to have that because you can just save it out as is and don't have to go into comp. Now, speaking of comp, this is something we're going to tackle for next week's class. Our end is going to be rendering this in Elements, and some of the different passes that we can generate for control in composite. And thanks for joining us for week 9 of vry102. If you have any questions, make sure to hit the forums. Have fun.
Hi, I'm Max.
Hey, here we are in 3ds Max. And the scene, we've got Alien Bust VO3.max, has that little extra strip of geometry for our fur. Everything is pretty much the same as it was in Maya, including the rim light here has been reduced from 120 to a 40 multiplier, so it doesn't blow out the hair any more than we'd want it to. Let's go ahead and select our object. We're going to add a fur modifier. Now, you may be using a plugin for your hair. In Max, I'm just going to show you very quickly how to do it with the built-in hair and fur modifier. It's a world space modifier, and here it is right there. We'll go ahead and add that. I won't get too much into the particulars of how to groom and run this hair. To truth be told, I'm not that terribly familiar with it as I am with the end hair in Maya, but here are some of the basics of what you're going to want to do. First, if we want to get the hair to be dynamic and to kind of collide with the shell of our geometry, our bust, we'll go to dynamics, and we can turn on collisions with polygon, and we're going to add our bust mesh to that. We'll have to enable the dynamics. It's set to none right now. I'm going to click on live, and we'll see the hairs bowing down to gravity. Our gravity's pretty low, so I'm going to jack that up to about 10 or so. And we'll see our hair start to fall down and pretty much get to our bust. Go to about a 11 or so on there. Now, the important part of this video is going to be how to get the fur, I should say how to get the hair, rendering with V-Ray, because it won't immediately render. Here we see we've got V-Ray is already enabled, and if I go in and start rendering my scene here, you'll start seeing it's doing a pretty poor job. It is rendering something out, but it's looking fairly terrible here. Let me go ahead and turn off our dynamics so we can save ourselves a little bit of grief here. And to get the fur, I should say, to get the hair to actually render with a V-Ray material, with our V-Ray hair material. Let's get the material editor up here. I'm going to create a new hair material here. We'll just drag that over and create a new one here. And we'll call this the Mohawk hair material. Now, to get this hair working with our Mohawk hair, a couple of things you need to do. First, you want to go into your environment settings, which if you just press the 8 key on your keyboard, you get to environment and effects. You can also get to it through the rendering menu by going to environment. And under the effects tab, there's hair and fur. Select that, and under the hair and fur rollout, you want to change your hairs from buffer to MR prim. This will enable us to attach the V-Ray material that we've just created to our hair modifier. So once that's in MR Prim, go ahead and close this window. And in the Modify panel, under MR Parameters is the slot you're going to need for your hair. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on Apply MR Shader, and I will connect my output socket. Over to this map as an instance, and we'll hit OK. Now I've got my V-Ray hair material coming in, and we're going to go ahead and render this. And you can see our fur is rendering according to the colors that we have in our default mohawk hair. And this material acts just like it did for the whiskers that were created for the V-Ray fur in last week's class. So you can go ahead and add in, let's go ahead and stop that render. You can go ahead and add in your hair info textures to control your color and your transparencies like we did last week. If you go into the material for the hair, you'll see we have the same parameters as we did in Maya. Transmission and diffuse color are the ones that you probably want to start mapping to get the same look that we got from Maya. Matter of fact, I created a hair info text node here, and I'm going to make that random by strand index, and I'm going to pump that into our diffuse texture. And our color A is going to be a nice crazy red, and our color B is going to be a nice crazy blue. So we're going to get random red and blue out of our color. And here you can see we've got the red and blue coming in straight from our info text. And here's the whole mohawk between red and blue. Now, one thing that we did in Maya is we had a grad in addition to the random color. We were darker at the base and lighter at the tips of the hair. And one quick way of doing that is to create an extra hair info texture. This one will become a black to red, which is dependent upon the position along the strand. So color A is the base of the strand and color B is the tip of. We've got position along the strand selected there. I'll make another one for the blue, and we'll make the tips of the hairs blue, but the base of those will be black. And in our regular hair color here that we're doing randomly, I'm going to pipe in my red one into my color A map as an instance, and my B one into my color B map as an instance. And what this does is now, instead of just a straight flat red or a straight flat blue that we're getting here, it'll read black to red along each strand. So if I go ahead and test a small area of our mohawk here, we'll see, go ahead and put this in our history, we'll see that the hairs will be black at the base and then will be either red or blue at the tip. because these are working in serial in conjunction with each other, and that way we are getting a similar result as what we had in Maya, more or less. This is one way that you can create that same sort of body that we had. So if you go back into the Maya video and take a look at some of the colorations and some of the settings, you'll be able to get your V-Ray hair material to look a little bit more like what we had in Maya. Of course, grooming the hair and all that kind of stuff depends on whether you're using the hair modifier here or if you're using a plugin. And if you are using a plugin for hair, the workflow for Maya for V-Ray is pretty much the same with the hair material. You just need to assign it however your plugin requires you to assign the shader. And that's that. Just a little bit of 3ds Max to show you the primary difference with the hair. The lens effects is exactly the same as it was in Maya. When you turn it on, you've got your bloom, you've got your glare. You also have your bloom mask based on intensity and your glare mask based on intensity. Same exact thing as before that we did in Maya. You want to replicate intensities of 1.2 for bloom and for glare when you do a front view render of the bust. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.